Welcome back, everyone. Cremulent Archer here, and now for the next 50 days of Max Loserman's One Painful Year. Day 100 was a simple day. I loaded another load of stuff into the car for the upcoming move. Afterwards, it was exercise and working on the practice walls some more to level my carpentry. Slow learner really did make it hard to reach level 4 carpentry. The following day, I continued to load up the car with stuff. I would be making a trip to the new base soon. After a bit of exercise, I spent some time foraging along the road. I had thought that the area was fairly clear of zombies, but one came out of the woods to say hello. In the evening, I made a cabbage salad. I was trying to keep my weight stable, but a primarily veggie diet combined with hearty appetite was making it very difficult. On day 102, I drove to the new base to drop stuff off. It was foggy in the morning, which made travel a bit difficult. After dropping off the bags, I decided to travel west from our little crossroads to see if I could find anything interesting. Sadly, all I came across was a few useless car wrecks, and by the afternoon I had to turn back and drive home. The next day was just exercise and loading up the car with more junk to move. On day 104, I drove back over to the new base with a load of stuff. I spent the day clearing a few zombies, and dismantling some clothing racks in the part of the store I wanted to live in. I had brought one of the bare mattresses with me, so I was able to stay and sleep there in the evening. In the morning, it was time to work on turning this clothing store into a home. Using a hand axe I chopped down a number of trees just outside the back door. After sawing the logs, I began by going around the new base and putting a single barricade on each window, for some minor protection against a stray zombie. After that, I used the remaining boards to build a few pretty crappy crates to put my junk in, rather than just the garbage bags I moved here in. The following day, I loaded up the crates I had with as much junk as they could hold. I then went over to the spiffos to do some electrical dismantling and to steal one of the large trash cans. I wouldn't be hoarding tin cans in this base. I could delete them. A zombie met me in the parking lot as I was heading over to loot the gas station. In the evening, I attempted to drive back to the old base, but I had to stop part of the way along to sleep in the car because it got too late. Stupid Sunday driver. In the morning, I traveled the rest of the way home. The zombie population on the road was starting to grow fairly substantially, and I did get out to fight a few of them, but I was glad I would be leaving soon as it was getting hard to do the drive. Upon returning home, a group of radishes were ready for harvest, and I found a zombie banging on the back of one of my walls that needed a good smashing. I decided to clear the road the next day. There turned out to be more zombies there than I expected, so the fighting took up most of the morning, but in the end I was able to clean out the majority of the zombies loitering on the road. In the afternoon I harvested a bunch of potatoes that were ready to go. In the morning I worked on my practice walls some more and discovered a zombie in the garden when I was heading back home. After taking care of the zombie, I spent the afternoon exercising. On day 110, I spent the morning foraging and found a leek, among other things. I also spent some time cutting planks into spears. I wouldn't be taking all these planks I had with me, so I figured I'd get a bit of XP out of them before I left. In the afternoon, I loaded up the last of the gear into the car. This was it, official moving day. A zombie came to see me off, but I ended up seeing him off instead. There was a final harvest of carrots to be had as well. Sadly, the strawberry bushes didn't fruit in time for me to harvest them, but time was wasting. I collected the cot and the last of the stuff and hit the road for the new base. After getting settled a bit, there was a few zombies that needed dealing with before bedtime. The next day was spent trying to make my new home a little bit more homey. I built a handful of new crates to hold all my stuff. I attempted to organize them a bit at the beginning, but I gave up because I'm lazy and disorganized slows everything down so much. I also set up my stuffed animals. On day 113, I traveled over to the spiffos to do some more dismantling of the cabinets there. It wasn't much XP, but every little bit helps. At the end of the day, I set out the 2 mouse traps I had and baited them with peanut butter. The following day, I traveled to get an antique stove for the base. I could have gone all the way back to the old base to get the one we had there, but I knew there was one available closer. Out in the woods, not far away, was a bunch of derelict cabins that had antique stoves. I did have to fight a few zombies for them, but it was easily handled. After returning home in the afternoon, I checked out the mouse traps, getting a mouse and a rat. It wasn't much, but every bit of protein helps. In the late afternoon, I took advantage of the fact that it was raining to plant some more crops. I decided I would try and stagger them a bit this time around, so that all of one type of veggie wouldn't harvest at the same time. The next day, I took a car north to check out what the road leading to Westpoint looks like. There was a healthy, but not huge population of zombies on the road. I was using it as a scouting trip, so I just turned around and came home. On the way home, the truck blew one of its tires. Driving on 3 is doable, but not really what you want to do long term. I had to kill a few zombies that followed me home, and then did some exercise as I had let it lapse a bit the last few days. On day 116, I decided to do the first Westpoint burn, or more precisely, the road leading up to Westpoint. It didn't work out too well. The zombie numbers were not consistent enough, and my fire zombies burned out before I made it to the bulk of the zombies. So instead, I spent some time bashing them down the old-fashioned way. My food was starting to get a bit thin, so the next day I walked back down to the Dixie trailer park area to try and find any food I may have missed previously. I found a bit, but the zombie population here had increased since I was last here, so I had to spend a fair amount of time collecting and leading away the local zombies. In the afternoon, the helicopter arrived, so I traveled into the deep woods to wait it out. It seemed to have worked because when I returned to our base in the evening, there were no surprise zombies waiting for me. The next day I started working on our base's protective walls. I was still trying to get to level 4 carpentry in order to build water barrels, but the walls themselves would be helpful in defending the base. In the evening I checked our mousetraps hoping for some tasty rodent meat. I finally changed the tire on the truck the next morning. I took the most healthy looking tire off of a different truck in the parking lot. Afterwards I drove north back towards Westpoint. When I was about as far north as I could safely get, I got out and started a small campfire. This time the fire worked better and was able to keep finding new zombies to add to the group. It was even successful enough I was able to get into the area of a small shopping center at the southern edge of Westpoint. It took most of the day to burn out the local zombies, but there was enough time in the evening afterwards to loot the 2 convenience stores to get some food, most of it junk food, to bring home. I was also able to check the 4 cars in the parking lot, but sadly none of them were immediately useful. To celebrate the Westpoint burn, I made pancakes in the morning. No syrup, sadly. I spent the bulk of the day practicing mechanics, but I did get some exercise in the afternoon. Also, the mouse traps had caught a couple of rodents, so meat was briefly back on the menu. Next day was more mechanics work, but in the afternoon I realized I had never properly looted the gas station store, so I did that. While looting I could hear a banging noise and found a zombie trapped in the gas station bathroom. I left him to his fate for the time being. Since it was raining heavily, I also attempted to wash in my cooking pots. The rain continued into the next day and I used it as an excuse for a crafting day. I ripped up some clothes to get thread for tailoring. I trained mechanics and spent the afternoon planting a few more crops and building some more walls. The next day was more of the same. Mechanics training and wall building was how Max spent his April 11th. On day 124, I finally had a clear day, so it was back in the car and back towards Westpoint to do another burn. The population on the road had gotten a lot denser since I had been here previously, so I had to start another burn farther out than intended. I did manage to get all the way back to the shopping center though. Another few hundred zombies taken off the board. Next day, another burn, same general area. With zombie populations like I'm playing with in this scenario, it's so hard to deplete the zombie numbers for a heavily infested area, but we're making a bit of progress. This time I was able to push as far north as the preschool, so little by little. A foggy day, 126, and I spent it focused on walls again. Towards the end of the day, I actually ended up running out of nails, which for the time being basically stops my goal of reaching carpentry level 4. I did experiment with making log walls, since I had access to a lot of cloth, but the XP gain from it didn't seem to be really worth it. The next day I was attempting to travel north to do another burn around the Westpoint, but about halfway there the car suddenly died. I had to clear the zombies from around the vicinity of the car before I could check to see what happened. At first I thought the engine or the battery had given out, but when I went to take the remaining gas from the car, it didn't have any despite having a quarter of a tank when we left this morning. The gas tank must have broken. I slowly walked my way home, killing zombies along the way. With the truck out of commission, I needed a new car. In the parking lot, there was a car we had the key to, but it didn't have a working battery. So I decided to walk Max all the way back to the car I left on the train tracks in order to take the battery from there. I had to kill a handful of zombies, but when I was checking the car for stuff, I found a battery in the trunk. I decided to take that instead of removing the one from the car. Rather than walk home, I went back to our old base to spend the evening. I think sleeping in an old base is technically against the rules of the One Painful Year challenge, but I guess I'm just a rebel like that. Calories were still a bit of an issue, so on the way home I stopped at the truck trailer in Dixie that was full of pop and orange soda and grabbed some to bring home. I had to deal with a few zombies. Upon returning home, I was all set to replace the battery in the car when a small problem reared its head. I had grabbed a truck battery, and not a car battery. So all that work and the car was still useless. In the evening, I decided to let that bathroom zombie out of the gas station. Day 131 and a crop of carrots had come in, so a bit of salad was to be had. Afterwards, I went to do some mechanics practice, but it was interrupted by the sound of a helicopter. I hid in the used car office while it circled, and luckily it didn't stay around long. I did a patrol around the edge of the area looking for zombies, but didn't find any. This base location really does seem to be in the middle of nowhere. Next morning it was back to Westpoint. I wasn't sure I could do it, but I wanted to burn enough to allow me to loot a bit. I was also banking on there being some random fire still burning somewhere. I got lucky because the preschool was on fire. I had brought a shotgun to shoot off to bring more zombies, but the population I was dealing with there was already out of control, so I ended up using it outside of one shot. Once the fire was out, I was able to loot a general store on the edge of downtown. I found more food than I could carry and a number of electronic home goods I could dismantle for electrical XP. On the way home, I collected more fire zombies to follow me. I wasn't actively trying to burn them out, but I thought it would be useful for starting new fires in the future. The next day was spent dismantling everything in the used car dealership for carpentry XP and a few meager nails. I also did some mechanics practice. Fog the next day meant I couldn't do much, so I mostly just cut down trees and sawed logs. Not much XP, but every little bit of forward progress is good. The lack of nails was causing me a lot of problems, so I decided to focus my next burn on heading towards the factories on the southeastern end of Westpoint. To that end, the burn I did on this day was focused on the road leading to them. Having to walk there and back because I didn't have a car was making this more frustrating than you would expect. So frustrating, in fact, that I spent the next day traveling back to the railroad track car again to take the battery that I actually needed home. Day 137, I celebrated the working car with another Westpoint burn. I didn't really have that much of a goal with this one except bringing the zombie numbers down. My water dispenser was getting close to empty, so I had to bring my pots in from outside and clean the water in order to top it up. Later in the day, while training mechanics, I made it to level 1. With this and electrical almost to level 1, I was like 2/3 of the way to being able to hotwire cars. I was continuing to struggle with keeping max weight up. Salads weren't enough to keep a hearty eater stable, it seems. Another day, another burn, this time focusing on the southern road again. I managed to make it all the way to the gas station and the factories this time, but didn't have enough time to burn them out and loot the buildings, so nails will have to wait for another day. On day 140, I did another downtown area burn in Westpoint. The important bits of it being that I caught sight of what looks like a good quality ambulance in the hotel parking lot. If I could pull off a siren burn with this car, it would go a long way to clearing Westpoint. I was also able to check a bunch of cars in the church parking lot, but none of them were useful. I pushed a bit too hard this day and had to travel home in the deep dark. Day 141 was foggy, so I dismantled all the stuff from the gas station and pushed hard on my exercise in the afternoon. It's turning out to be very hard to get to the next level of fitness, just like in real life. Busy day. A burn in the morning that eventually allowed Max access to the factory. Inside the factory, we finally found the boxes of nails that I was looking for. In addition, the helicopter showed up. I stayed inside the factory hoping that it would cause it to leave quickly, but it did not. While looting the crates, I did find a mining helmet light. So when combined with the mining helmet that we have at home, we now have a wearable flashlight. Zombies came into the factory in smallish numbers due to the helicopter, and when I was done, I made a break for it. I had to do another burn in order to get the car clear enough to drive home well after dark. Now that I had nails, day 143 was all about carpentry, building walls to try and hit that level 4 carpentry goal. I had to stay up building walls until after the sun went down, but I managed to pull it off. First priority in the morning was making as many water barrels as my garbage bag supply could manage. Then I went ahead and used the materials I had remaining to start upgrading the existing walls I had. I'm not actually sure if this is a good min-maxy use of time and materials, but basic level walls are so ugly, I wanted to pretty up the place. On day 145, I headed back up to Westpoint, and in credit to the work the Burns are doing, I was able to get into the shopping area without having to fight very many zombies. I collected as much of the junk food from the convenience store as I could, and did a bit of electronic dismantling, finally hitting level 1. What happened next was one of the scariest sections of this playthrough so far. I was attempting to loot a bit, but the zombie population got too high, so I used a nearby burning house to start them on fire. While moving through a tree, either a zombie or the tree themselves cut Max on his leg. I couldn't stop to bandage, and the limp was slowing him down considerably. I had to use what little stamina we had to keep ahead of the fire zombies, as Max limped his way back to the car. It was harrowing, but we managed to make it out alive. The next day was spent powering on exercise and upgrading walls around the base. On day 147, a quick burn to clean up the road a bit, and then a bit of foraging in the afternoon. Day 148, I returned to Westpoint to do a bit of looting. I managed to check out a house and return to the general store and get a bit more of the food from upstairs. On day 149, the tropical storm I had been seeing warnings of on the radio finally hit the area, making doing much of anything outside impossible. I brought the pots inside and boiled the water and then put it in the water dispenser. Later in the day, I sent Max outside to bathe in our newly filled water barrels. I spent the rest of the day practicing tailoring. On day 150, the rain continued to fall. I spent the day practicing various skills and planting a few more lines of crops in the rain so I wouldn't have to water them. As the rain slowly comes to an end, this seems like a good spot to leave poor Max Loserman for now.